January 1943. A cold wind drifts across the French Atlantic coast, carrying the smell of salt and diesel toward a concrete observation bunker overlooking the gray surf. Inside, a group of German naval officers stand behind thick glass, their breath fogging the air as they watch a grainy reconnaissance film flicker across a projector screen. The footage, captured weeks earlier, shows American forces attempting yet another amphibious drill somewhere along the eastern seaboard. The Germans chuckle under their breath. To them, it looks clumsy. Slow boats, awkward disembarkation, men jumping into waist-deep water, stumbling through surf. Nothing like the sharp, brutal precision Germany had displayed in Norway or Crete. Nothing that could threaten a fortified coastline. Amateurs, one officer mutters, as another smirks, convinced that any American landing would shatter against the Atlantic wall long before it reached a defensive machine gun nest. But far from this bunker, thousands of miles away in the muddy shipyards of New Orleans, something else is taking shape. Quietly, efficiently, and far faster than German intelligence realizes. A small wooden craft is about to erase every assumption the Axis holds about American amphibious warfare. And to understand how this transformation began, we must step back into the world that created it. In the years before America entered the Second World War, amphibious warfare was still an uncertain science. The United States possessed a navy built for blue water operations, a Marine Corps trained in ship-to-shore assaults, an industrial base capable of constructing almost anything, but it lacked the essential tool that tied these strengths together, a fast, reliable craft that could deliver men directly onto a contested shoreline. Early landing attempts revealed this painful truth. Exercises along the Carolina and Chesapeake coasts showed Marines climbing over the sides of standard boats, dropping blindly into surf, and struggling to form coherent assault lines. Officers recorded the same problems again and again: slow unloading, exposed troops, and landing craft that grounded far too early. None of it impressed observers abroad. Germany, by contrast, believed it had mastered amphibious operations. The Wehrmacht's lightning seizure of Norway in 1940 and the airborne-supported invasion of Crete in 1941 reinforced an image of a military that could strike across water with precision and confidence. When German intelligence reviewed Allied landing drills, especially early American maneuvers, they saw nothing that resembled a threat to hardened shore defenses. Meanwhile, the Allies themselves faced harsh lessons. The British disaster at Dieppe in August 1942, a frontal assault on a heavily fortified port, demonstrated how catastrophically an amphibious attack could fail without specialized equipment, coordinated doctrine, and purpose-built landing craft. American planners studied the reports with growing urgency. They knew that any future push against Axis territory, whether in North Africa, the Mediterranean, the Pacific Islands, or one day the beaches of France, required a new solution, one that did not yet exist. But while military engineers debated specifications and committees argued over prototypes, an unexpected figure had already begun building the answer, quietly, stubbornly, and far from Washington. And that journey begins in the shipyards of Louisiana. The shipyards of New Orleans were not the kind of place military planners typically searched for revolutionary ideas. Yet it was there, among the cypress sawdust, river mud, and the constant roar of diesel engines, that a self-taught boat builder named Andrew Jackson Higgins was reshaping the future of amphibious warfare. Higgins had spent years designing shallow-draft boats for Gulf Coast trappers, oil workers, and Prohibition-era patrols. His vessels could skim across swamps, glide over submerged routes, and beach themselves without damage, traits no Navy landing craft possessed. When Marine Corps officers first tested one of his boats in 1938, they immediately recognized its potential. It moved quickly, handled rough water, and, most importantly, could slide directly onto a shoreline and reverse just as easily. But Higgins was not satisfied. He redesigned the hull, strengthened the frame, and added a feature inspired by Japanese landing craft seen in China, a forward ramp that allowed troops to run straight onto the beach. The result was the LCVP, the Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel, a simple plywood vessel powered by a single diesel engine, cheap to build, easy to repair, and capable of carrying a full rifle squad. At first, the concept seemed almost too unconventional for some Navy officials. Yet war has a way of stripping hesitation. After Pearl Harbor, as the United States prepared for large-scale operations in the Pacific and Mediterranean, Higgins' designs suddenly became indispensable. Production orders surged, factories expanded, thousands of workers, men and women, began turning out landing craft by the dozen. Still, outside the United States, few understood what this meant. German intelligence classified the LCVP as a minor auxiliary craft, unaware it would soon define entire campaigns. To grasp how profoundly this small wooden boat would reshape the war, we must examine the angles that made it so transformative. Technological transformation. The Higgins boat was not elegant, armored, or intimidating at first glance. Its hull was simple plywood, its silhouette box-like, and its engine no more complex than a truck's. Yet these qualities made it revolutionary. The shallow draft allowed the craft to ride over reefs and sandbars that halted traditional vessels. The reinforced bow ramp turned the act of landing from a chaotic leap over the gunwale into a direct, controlled assault. Troops could rush forward in seconds instead of fumbling awkwardly over the sides. Vehicles, jeeps, guns, ammunition carts could follow behind them. For the first time, the U.S. possessed a landing craft designed specifically for war, not improvised from civilian boats. Human experience. For the soldiers and Marines who boarded them, the Higgins boat represented more than transport. It was the final quiet moment before chaos. Packed shoulder to shoulder, rifles held close, they listened to the engine hum as spray rose around the hull. The boat slammed forward, engines growling, until the ramp crashed down into surf and sand. In that instant, the craft transformed from a protective shell into a pathway toward danger. Veterans later recalled that familiar creak of the ramp hinges, the sound that meant it was time to run. Despite the fear, most trusted the boats. They were dependable, predictable, and quicker than anything they'd trained with. Enemy perception. For German coastal units, the sudden appearance of these craft came as a shock. Early reports described swarms of small American boats approaching beaches with alarming speed and discipline. Beaches previously judged difficult or impossible to assault were being reached with precision. German commanders realized that the Allies were no longer using outdated, vulnerable landing vessels. They were delivering troops with a tempo and efficiency the Atlantic Wall had not been designed to counter. These perspectives set the stage for the deeper forces driving the Higgins boat revolution.
Industrial power. Behind every Higgins boat landing on a distant shore stood an industrial engine unmatched in the world. Once the U.S. Navy approved large-scale procurement, Higgins Industries expanded at a pace that stunned even military planners. Wooden warehouses became full-scale production plants. Assembly lines operated day and night, staffed by welders, carpenters, machinists, and thousands of newly trained workers, many of them women entering industrial labor for the first time. By 1943, Higgins facilities in New Orleans were producing landing craft faster than the Navy could deploy them. More than 20,000 Higgins boats rolled into service, a number the Axis could not fathom. This industrial momentum meant something Germany could never match: the ability to deliver overwhelming force anywhere, repeatedly. Tactical advantage. The Higgins boat fundamentally reshaped amphibious assault doctrine. Instead of forcing assault troops to wade long distances under fire, the LCVP delivered them directly onto the sandline. This drastically reduced exposure, tightened formation control, and accelerated beachhead buildup. On rocky Pacific atolls, Marines used the boats to bypass reefs and land where defenders least expected. In the Mediterranean, they allowed Allied divisions to strike Sicily's rugged coastline with precision. And in the planning rooms of the European theater, commanders realized something unprecedented. These boats made broad, multi-beach landings feasible. Entire operations could be synchronized because the U.S. now possessed a vessel designed for simultaneous mass deployment. Command perspective. Senior leaders quickly recognized the strategic value. Eisenhower credited the landing craft as a decisive instrument in planning future invasions. Admiral Nimitz noted their reliability during Pacific Island hopping campaigns. Even British commanders, long experienced with coastal operations, admitted that American landing craft multiplied Allied options. Every major amphibious operation from 1942 onward relied on them, creating a new kind of mobility that commanders on both sides had not seen before. These combined forces pushed the Higgins boat from a simple design to a war-defining instrument, leading directly into the moment when its value became undeniable. The turning point arrived in the Pacific, where the limits of every landing craft were exposed with brutal clarity. Nowhere was this more evident than on the reefs of Tarawa in November 1943. The lagoon's shallow water created a deadly barrier that halted traditional landing vessels hundreds of yards offshore, leaving assault troops to wade under concentrated Japanese fire. But the Higgins boats, with their shallow draft and reinforced hulls, drove farther in than any other craft. Many still struck the reef, but those that made it through delivered Marines directly to the shore, giving the first assault waves a fighting chance. At Guadalcanal earlier in the war, the LCVP had already proven its worth. It ferried troops, supplies, ammunition, and evacuation casualties continuously between ship and shore, despite rough surf, enemy raids, and chaotic conditions. Commanders noted that without the reliability of the Higgins boats, the tenuous early foothold on the island might have collapsed. These operations sent a clear message. The United States had solved the problem that other nations were still struggling to understand. German intelligence reports from 1942 and 1943 began reflecting an emerging respect and concern for America's new amphibious capabilities. Observers described landings executed with unexpected coordination and troops appearing in places previously considered inaccessible. Yet, even these assessments underestimated what was coming, because the true demonstration of the Higgins boat's power would take place not in the Pacific, but on the shores of Europe, in the largest amphibious assault in recorded history. Before dawn on June 6, 1944, the English Channel churned under thousands of Allied vessels advancing towards Normandy. Beneath the overcast sky, rows upon rows of Higgins boats hung from davits, lowered into the water, engines coughing to life in the cold morning air. Each carried 30 fully equipped soldiers, men who had stepped directly into the most heavily defended beaches in Europe. As the Armada approached the French coast, German coastal units prepared for a familiar pattern: slow landings, scattered formations, troops forced to disembark far from shore. But that pattern never came. Instead, entire waves of LCVP surged forward with disciplined timing, hitting designated sectors within seconds of one another. The ramps dropped, and American infantry poured out in coordinated lines, advancing faster than German defenders expected or were prepared to counter. Field reports from German commanders that morning reveal a mix of shock and disbelief. They noted that the American craft seemed limitless in number, arriving in constant intervals despite fire, obstacles, and rough surf. The very scale and precision of the landings shattered early defensive assumptions. What had begun as an underestimated wooden boat now underpinned the success of the most ambitious amphibious assault ever attempted. And once the beaches were secured, the consequences of this breakthrough began to unfold.
When the smoke settled over Normandy's beaches, Allied commanders began assessing the factors that made the landings succeed despite the fierce resistance and brutal casualties. Again and again, one element appeared in their reports: the uninterrupted flow of troops and equipment delivered by Higgins boats. By the end of D-Day, thousands of soldiers, engineers, medics, artillery crews, and supplies had been pushed across the beaches faster than German defenders could reorganize. The LCVP had enabled a tempo of reinforcement that overwhelmed even the most hardened fortifications. German post-operation assessments reached similar conclusions. Interrogations of coastal officers revealed surprise at how quickly American assault waves reformed under fire. They noted the traditional weaknesses of amphibious operations. Delays, confusion, bottlenecks were far less visible than expected. Some German analysts even admitted that the Allies had solved logistical problems the Atlantic Wall had been designed to exploit. For Allied planners, Normandy confirmed what the Pacific had already proven. The Higgins Boat was not merely a vessel. It was the backbone of modern amphibious warfare. Its reliability allowed commanders to plan offensives with confidence, knowing that every phase, from the first assault to the steady build-up inland, had a dependable foundation. But the long-term consequences extended far beyond that single day. In the months following Normandy, the Higgins Boat became a symbol of Allied momentum. As American forces pushed through France, liberated Belgium, and crossed the German border, analysts looked back at the logistical chain that had made these advances possible. Again, they traced it to the same starting point: the ability to land entire divisions with precision on hostile shores. From southern France during Operation Dragoon to the liberation of the Philippines, the LCVP repeated its performance across multiple theaters, proving that its success at Normandy was not an exception but a standard. Strategists across the Allied command acknowledged a profound shift. Amphibious operations were no longer gambles defined by unpredictable landings and scattered formations. They had become calculated movements supported by accurate timing, rapid deployment, and overwhelming force, all enabled by standardized, dependable landing craft. Germany, once confident in its coastal defenses, now faced an enemy capable of projecting power across oceans with unprecedented reliability. Even after the war, military historians noted that the Higgins Boat had accelerated Allied campaigns, shortened operations, and saved countless lives by reducing exposure during landings. Its impact reshaped doctrine well into the post-war era, influencing designs for future landing vessels around the world. And with its military legacy firmly established, only one part remained: understanding what this achievement meant in a broader human and historical sense. The story of the Higgins Boat is, at its core, the story of how a simple idea can reshape the direction of a global conflict. It did not emerge from a powerful military institution, a famous engineer, or a well-funded laboratory. It came from a workshop on the Gulf Coast, built by a man who understood water, timber, and the needs of the people who worked along America's southern waterways. Andrew Higgins never saw himself as a revolutionary figure, yet history placed his craft at the center of the war's most consequential moments. What made the Higgins Boat extraordinary was not complexity, but clarity of purpose. It solved a problem that had crippled amphibious operations for decades. It carried men directly to the point of decision, reducing the gap between planning and action. By doing so, it changed the balance between attacker and defender in ways that rippled across continents. The beaches of Normandy, the cliffs of Sicily, the reefs of Tarawa, and the jungles of the Philippines all felt the influence of a wooden vessel powered by a single diesel engine and the determination of American industry. Reflecting on its impact reveals something deeper about warfare and innovation. Victory in the Second World War was not shaped solely by grand strategies or mighty battleships, but by the accumulation of practical solutions, tools that simplified the complex, accelerated the slow, and brought order to chaos. The Higgins Boat embodied this principle. It showed that ingenuity, when paired with industrial willpower, could overcome even the most fortified defenses. For the soldiers who rode in its hull, it was the last moment of shelter before stepping into history. For the commanders who relied on it, it was the dependable link between sea and land. And for the nations watching from afar, friend and enemy alike, it was proof that American adaptability could transform the nature of warfare itself. Its legacy endures not because of its materials, but because of what it enabled: the ability to land where others believed landing was impossible. And in that achievement, the Higgins Boat helped redefine the war and the world that followed.